Hello again and welcome to the Detox Health Channel. We're excited you're joining us today.
Yeah, great to be back.
We've got a fantastic lineup of health deep dives planned for you, and we know how valuable your time is.
Totally.
That's why we created these conversations to bring you insightful knowledge on important health topics without you having to spend hours searching through, articles and websites.
Exactly. We've sifted through the research and news on this topic so you don't have to bringing you the core information in a way that's easy to understand.
And today we're diving into a question that might just have you rethinking your dessert decisions. Is ice cream actually healthy?
Ah, the big question.
Now, before you reach for that spoon, we've looked at a range of interesting sources to unpack this. We're talking about an analysis from PBS NewsHour, a Daily Mail article featuring perspectives from dietitians, and a comprehensive overview from Healthline.
Quite a mix there.
Our mission is to uncover some surprising findings and really understand what the science says, all while keeping things, clear and engaging for you. Okay, let's unpack this, starting with something rather unexpected that caught our eye in the PBS NewsHour analysis.
Right. What's intriguing right off the bat is a claim that might make ice cream enthusiasts do a little happy dance. The PBS NewsHour piece discusses a recent article that drew its conclusions from a 2018 doctoral thesis.
Okay, a thesis.
Yeah, and this thesis looked at a massive amount of data from two long-term studies out of Harvard. The Nurses' Health Study, which started way back in 1976, and the Health Professionals Follow-Up Study, beginning in 1986. Both of these studies followed participants for like 2 decades, tracking their health and lifestyle.
Right, huge studies. And within these, the thesis focused on a specific group.
Precisely. The researchers zeroed in on roughly 16,000 participants who reported having type 2 diabetes at the start of these studies. These individuals had also provided detailed information about what they typically ate over the previous year. Now, here's where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
The researchers found that those with type 2 diabetes who enjoyed ice cream no more than twice a week seemed to have a 12% lower risk of developing cardiovascular disease compared to those who didn't eat ice cream at all.
12%. That's a statistic that definitely makes you pause when you're considering your after-dinner treat. But like anything that sounds a little too good to be true, there's usually more to the story, right?
Definitely. This raises a really important question about the bigger picture. The PBS NewsHour analysis carefully points out that this apparent link between eating ice cream and a lower risk of heart disease only became noticeable when other aspects of the participants' health, and especially how healthily they ate overall, were taken into account.
Ah, okay.
This strongly suggests that maintaining a generally healthy dietary pattern might be the more significant factor in reducing cardiovascular disease risk for people with type 2 diabetes, rather than, the occasional scoop of ice cream acting like some kind of health booster.
That makes perfect sense. It's easy to get fixated on one particular food, but it's almost certainly the overall eating habits that have the biggest impact. And the PBS NewsHour piece also highlights some crucial limitations of this type of study, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It's vital to remember that this was an observational study.
Right.
What that means is it can show an association, in this case, between eating ice cream and a lower risk of heart disease, but it cannot, and this is key, prove that eating ice cream directly causes that lower risk. There could be other factors at play that weren't fully understood or accounted for.
Such as, give us an example of what else might be going on.
Well, one possibility they mentioned is what's known as reverse causality.
Reverse causality.
Yeah, think of it this way. It's conceivable that participants who were already at a higher risk of cardiovascular disease might have been advised by their doctors to change their diets, perhaps even specifically cutting out sugary treats like ice cream after they joined the study. If that were the case, it would create the appearance that not eating ice cream was linked to a higher risk, when the reality might be that those who were already less healthy were simply less likely to consume it.
Ah, I see. So it's not that the ice cream was protective, but that people who were already more health conscious or facing health issues might have avoided it. That's a really important distinction to make.
Exactly.
And the article also touches on why it's so difficult to really pin down ice cream's direct effects through more rigorous testing.
Exactly. To truly determine if ice cream has a direct effect on cardiovascular disease risk, the most reliable method would be a clinical trial.
Right. The gold standard.
Yeah, that would involve one group of people intentionally including ice cream in their diet and another similar group consuming a control food that isn't ice cream. Then researchers would track their health outcomes over time. However, as the PBS NewsHour points out, This kind of study would be incredibly difficult to carry out practically.
Logistically, yeah.
And the significant costs involved, especially without substantial funding from the food industry, make it very unlikely to ever happen.
So the initial surprising suggestion that ice cream might be healthy comes with a whole load of important caveats and uncertainties attached. Okay, let's delve a bit deeper then into what the research actually tells us about ice cream's effects on health, or perhaps the lack of concrete findings.
Well, what's fascinating here is just how limited the specific research is on ice cream itself. The PBS NewsHour notes that studies that have looked at it often involve participants consuming very small amounts, sometimes less than a quarter of a serving per day,
Wow, tiny amounts.
which really isn't enough to draw any solid conclusions about its overall impact on health.
That is surprising. You'd think something as popular as ice cream would have been studied more thoroughly.
You would indeed, but the research tends to focus on broader dietary patterns or specific nutrients rather than like individual ultra-processed foods. The article does mention an Italian study that found a link between higher ice cream consumption and a higher risk of non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, which, as you know, is a risk factor for both type 2 diabetes and heart disease.
Yeah.
However, it's important to keep in mind that this same study also found similar links with other foods, like red meat, again underscoring the importance of overall diet quality as a key factor.
So it's less about ice cream being uniquely detrimental and more about how it fits into our overall dietary habits. Seems like a running theme.
Precisely. And the PBS NewsHour then brings up a really crucial point. Ice cream is generally classified as an ultra-processed food.
Okay, UPF.
Yeah. Due to the way it's manufactured, it's typically very high in calories, unhealthy fats, and added sugars. And we know from a substantial body of research that a high intake of ultra-processed foods is linked to a range of negative health outcomes, including an increased risk of both type 2 diabetes and cardiovascular disease.
Mhm.
Public health guidelines consistently recommend limiting our intake of added sugars and saturated fats for these very reasons.
Which, let's face it, doesn't exactly paint a health halo around our beloved ice cream.
Not really, no. The article also draws a contrast between ice cream and other dairy products, such as fermented yogurt and cheese,
Ah, right.
for which there's more compelling evidence suggesting potential benefits for heart health and in reducing the risk of type 2 diabetes. While ice cream contains dairy fat, whether it offers the same potential benefits is an area that needs further investigation.
What about the calcium we often associate with dairy? Does ice cream get any credit there?
It does contain calcium, and the PBS NewsHour acknowledges that. However, it also rightly points out that there are many other excellent sources of calcium, including other dairy products, as well as things like pulses and nuts.
Sure.
And these often come with a much more favorable overall nutritional profile without the high sugar content found in most ice creams. So while the calcium is present, it's not really a unique health benefit that sets ice cream apart.
Okay, so the initial hopeful news seems to melt away a bit under closer examination. But let's change direction and look at what the dietitians had to say in that Daily Mail article. They seem to offer a slightly more optimistic, or at least a more nuanced perspective.
Yeah, what's interesting here is the angle they take. The Daily Mail article definitely adopts a good news for ice cream lovers tone, highlighting some surprising potential benefits, particularly when ice cream is compared to other desserts that are even less nutritious.
Right, they mentioned the calcium content, for one thing.
Yes, they pointed out that a 2/3 cup serving of dairy ice cream can provide around 12% of the daily recommended amount of calcium, which, as we've discussed, is important for maintaining strong bones and muscles.
Okay, 12%.
Yeah.
And they also brought up protein content, which isn't something I typically associate with ice cream.
That's right. Depending on the brand, some ice creams can offer around 6 grams of protein per 2/3 cup serving, which is actually comparable to the amount of protein you might find in a single large egg.
That's genuinely surprising. So
Yeah.
it's not entirely just empty calories then.
Not entirely. And the dietitians in the article also explained how the combination of this protein with the moderate levels of fat present in some ice creams can potentially help to slow down the release of sugar into the bloodstream.
Interesting.
This could be beneficial in preventing those rapid spikes in blood glucose that are linked to an increased risk of diabetes.
That's an interesting point, especially when they compared ice cream to things like Sour Patch Kids, which are essentially pure sugar.
Exactly. They specifically mention how candies like Sour Patch Kids have practically no fat, protein, or fiber. All of these components, fat, protein, and fiber, help to delay the absorption of carbohydrates and therefore sugar into the blood.
Right.
Over time, repeated blood sugar spikes can indeed contribute to the development of type 2 diabetes and heart disease.
So in that specific context, ice cream might be a slightly better choice than pure sugar candy. A lesser evil, maybe.
That seems to be the general idea they're conveying. However, the dietitians in the Daily Mail were also very clear about the significant downsides. They used Ben& Jerry's as a prominent example, noting that a single serving contains about half the recommended daily amount of saturated fat for an adult, which is, well, it's a considerable amount.
Wow, half your daily saturated fat.
Yeah.
And the sugar content is still a major concern, I would imagine.
Absolutely. They pointed out that a single serving can also contain around 2/3 of an adult's recommended daily intake of added sugar.
2/3.
And as they rightly added, it's likely that most people don't stop at just a single serving.
True. It's easy to eat far more than the recommended portion without really thinking about it. The whole pint sometimes.
Right. So while they suggest ice cream might be supreme over other less nutritious desserts due to some nutrient content like calcium and protein, they are by no means suggesting it's a health food.
Yeah, supreme over other bad options isn't exactly a glowing endorsement.
Yeah.
There was a quote from a dietitian, Stephanie Van Zelfden, that I found particularly interesting. She suggested that the combination of fat and protein in ice cream could be a good option for diabetics in moderation compared to lower fat, higher sugar desserts like sorbet.
That's a nuanced but important point. Her reasoning is that the presence of fat and protein alongside the sugar in ice cream can help to mitigate the rapid blood sugar spikes that you might see after consuming desserts that are lower in fat but higher in simple sugars, such as sorbet. It's all about managing that glycemic response, you know?
Okay, so even with these potentially minor benefits highlighted by dietitians, it still sounds like moderation is the crucial takeaway. Now let's turn to the Healthline overview for a more detailed breakdown of the nutritional content of ice cream.
Yeah, the Healthline article provides a really useful side-by-side comparison of the nutritional profiles of different types of vanilla ice cream.
Yeah.
Regular, premium, low-fat, and no added sugar versions, all based on a half-cup serving. What immediately jumps out is the significant variation in calories, total fat, cholesterol, protein, total carbohydrates, and particularly the sugar content across these different options.
Right. I remember seeing that premium ice cream generally lives up to its name in terms of being higher in pretty much everything: sugar, fat, and consequently calories.
Exactly. And Healthline makes a really important point that while low-fat and no-sugar added options might be marketed as healthier alternatives, they can still be surprisingly high in calories. Furthermore, those no added sugar versions often contain sugar alcohols, which, as they point out, can unfortunately lead to digestive discomfort like bloating and gas for some individuals.
So you might be reducing your sugar intake, but potentially facing other unpleasant side effects.
Yeah.
It's definitely something to be aware of when making those choices.
Yeah, trade-offs.
But Healthline did also point out some of the positive aspects, similar to what the dietitians mentioned.
Yes. They highlighted that most ice creams do provide some phosphorus and calcium, offering around 6 and 10% of the daily value per serving, respectively. And they reiterate the importance of these minerals for things like muscle function and maintaining healthy bones.
Okay.
However, just like the PBS NewsHour analysis emphasized, this mineral content really doesn't outweigh the substantial calorie and sugar load that comes with most ice creams.
And the added sugar content really seems to be a consistent red flag across all of our sources.
Absolutely. Healthline emphasizes the high amount of added sugar, which can range quite significantly from 12 to as much as 24 grams in just a half-cup serving.
Wow.
They remind us of the general health recommendation to limit added sugars to less than 10% of our total daily calories, and how quickly even a small serving of ice cream can contribute to exceeding that limit.
Easily done.
They also clearly link excessive sugar intake to a wide range of health problems, including obesity, heart disease, type 2 diabetes, and non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. No surprises there, really.
No, but it bears repeating. And beyond just the sugar and fat content, Healthline also delves into some of the less obvious potential downsides of ice cream, such as the various additives it often contains.
Right. This is where it becomes particularly interesting and perhaps a bit concerning for regular ice cream consumers. Healthline points out that many commercially produced ice creams are highly processed and contain a variety of artificial flavors and additives. They specifically mention the FDA's recent ban of 7 artificial flavorings due to their link to cancer in animal studies, noting that these compounds were commonly found in ice cream and other types of desserts.
That's definitely something that makes you think twice about what you're eating. Those ingredient lists can be long.
They really can. They also mention artificial food dyes, such as red number 3 and blue number 2, which, while currently FDA approved, have been linked in some research to hyperactivity and behavioral issues in children. Then there are the thickeners, like gar gum, which can cause digestive issues like bloating and gas in some people, and carrageenan, which has shown potential for causing intestinal inflammation in animal studies. So it's not just about the macronutrients like sugar and fat. The ingredient list itself can be a source of potential concerns.
It really underscores just how ultra-processed many commercially available ice creams are. So given all of this information, can ice cream ever realistically fit into a healthy dietary pattern? Or is it just a treat, full stop?
Well, Healthline's perspective aligns with what we've heard from the other sources. Occasional enjoyment in small amounts is likely fine for most people, but moderation is absolutely key.
Okay, moderation again.
They suggest some practical strategies for managing portion sizes, such as opting for pre-portioned single-serving items or simply using smaller bowls when you're scooping it yourself.
Good tips.
They also caution against automatically assuming that low-fat or low-sugar options are inherently healthier, as they might still be high in calories or contain artificial ingredients. Their advice is to always take the time to carefully read and compare nutrition labels.
Very important.
And they also recommend practicing mindful eating, which involves really savoring the treat while being more aware of exactly how much you're consuming.
Mindful eating with ice cream. That might be a skill some of us need to work on.
Yeah.
But it's a good reminder to be present and conscious about what we're eating.
Yeah, slow down and enjoy it.
And what specific recommendations does Healthline offer for making healthier ice cream choices when we do decide to indulge?
They provide some really actionable tips. First and foremost, they advise us to always scrutinize those nutrition and ingredient labels. They suggest prioritizing products that are made with a relatively short list of recognizable real ingredients, things like cream, milk, cocoa, and vanilla beans, and to try and avoid those heavily processed options with long lists of ingredients that are difficult to pronounce or identify.
Makes sense. Keep it simple.
Exactly. If you're paying attention to your weight, they recommend looking for options with lower amounts of added sugar and ideally under 200 calories per serving.
Okay, good benchmark. And for those who are really looking for a healthier way to enjoy a frozen treat, they even shared a simple recipe for a homemade alternative, didn't they?
Yes. They introduced a super easy 2-ingredient nice cream recipe that uses just frozen bananas and a little bit of unsweetened almond, coconut, or even regular cow's milk blended until it reaches a smooth and creamy consistency.
Bananas and milk, basically.
Pretty much. The great thing about this is that it naturally contains no added sugar, is lower in calories compared to traditional ice cream, and actually provides more nutrients from the fruit. It sounds like a fantastic way to satisfy that ice cream craving in a much healthier way.
That homemade ice cream idea sounds surprisingly appealing. I might have to try that. So as we bring our deep dive into the chilly world of ice cream to a close, what would you say are the most important takeaways for our listeners?
Well, if we really look at the overall picture, while that initial study sparked some interesting questions about a potential link between ice cream consumption and lower heart disease risk in a specific group,
Yeah, the diabetes group.
and dietitians highlighted some minor nutritional contributions like calcium and protein, the overwhelming evidence really points to the fact that ice cream, in its typical commercially produced form, is predominantly a high-calorie, high-sugar, and often heavily processed treat.
Agreed. It seems like any potential nutritional benefits are significantly overshadowed by the high sugar, unhealthy fat, and calorie content,
Right.
as well as the potential presence of those less desirable additives we talked about.
Exactly. The importance of enjoying ice cream in moderation simply cannot be emphasized enough, and making informed decisions by carefully examining those nutrition labels is absolutely crucial. Ultimately, as all of our sources underscore, the overall quality of your diet and your broader lifestyle habits are far more influential factors in your long-term health than the occasional indulgence in ice cream.
So, the key message isn't that you can never enjoy a scoop of ice cream, but it's definitely not a health food. And when you do decide to treat yourself, it's best to do so in moderation and perhaps even consider making that simple and more nutritious homemade ice cream as a delicious alternative.
That's a perfect way to summarize it. It offers a way to enjoy a frozen treat without the same level of nutritional drawbacks.
Well, that brings us to the end of our deep dive into ice cream for today. We truly hope you found this conversation insightful and that it's given you some valuable food for thought, no pun intended.
Uh-huh, indeed.
Remember to check out the Detox Health channel for many more of these in-depth explorations into a variety of health-related topics. We're here to bring you valuable knowledge without the hassle of sifting through countless articles and websites yourself.
Keep learning.
And if you enjoyed this deep dives and want to stay informed about future health topics, please be sure to subscribe to the Detox Health channel so you don't miss any of our upcoming conversations. Thanks so much for tuning in.
Thanks, everyone.